Alrighty then. And we're back. Studying in the FFOZ commentaries. I started earlier and doing reading from the commentaries on Vayera, and he went. And we're now up to Genesis chapter 19 in the commentary, doing Shadows of the Messiah, where we find shadows of Yeshua and the deeper meaning of what is in the Torah. And also we're doing Depths of the Torah, which gives also deeper meanings, and not just Shadows of the Messiah, but just other deeper meanings that are found in the Torah. So we'll start here in Genesis 19:24. Here we are. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. Genesis 19:24 through 25. Early Christian writers like to argue with Jews about the divinity of Messiah. They often used Genesis 19:24 to prove that Messiah is God. The awkward grammatical construction of Genesis 19:24 makes it read as if Hashem rained brimstone and fire from Hashem out of heaven. The absence of a pronoun makes it sound like two Hashems are at work in this verse. Second century Christian writers, teachers like Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Tertullian, read this as evidence that Jesus is Hashem, but distinct from the Father. According to their interpretation, the angel with whom Abraham negotiated for Sodom was not an angel, but the Son of God. Irenaeus explains the Son, who had also been talking with Abraham, received power to judge the people of Sodom for their wickedness. In view of this rating, the church fathers interpreted the passage to mean the Lord, i.e. the Son, rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord, i.e. the Father, out of heaven. Christian apologists found this midrashic interpretation of Genesis 19:24 valuable for their disputations with Jews. But in retrospect, the argument falls flat. Rashi points out that biblical Hebrew sometimes uses a noun when we would expect a pronoun. The verse only means to say, then the Lord caused a rainfall of brimstone and fire to fall out of the sky from him onto Sodom and Gomorrah. To read Genesis 19:24 as a Christological statement places more weight on the verse than the simple grammatical issue can bear. Yes, we can continue reading. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may preserve seed through our father. Genesis 19:32. The Davidic dynasty, including the line of the righteous Messiah, traces its origins back to some scandalous and unseemly stories. As mentioned above, the incestuous union of Lot and his daughters gave birth to the people of Moab, from whom came Ruth in the house of David. The Messianic line also contains the infamous stories of Tamar, seduction of Judah, Rahab, the prostitute marriage to Solomon, Bathsheba's scandalous marriage to David, and so forth. The Midrash Rabbah connects the story of Lot's daughters with Eve's prophecy over her son Seth. God has appointed me another seed, Genesis 4:25. Lot's daughter did not say, so that we may preserve a child by our father, but so that we may preserve seed through our father. She alluded to the seed which would arise from a different source, the seed that is King Messiah, Genesis Rabbah 51:8. So Sarah conceived. We got to move on to the depths of the Torah now, so that we don't jump too many chapters ahead. Naming stories. Thus the daughters of Lot were with child by their father, Genesis 19:36. Lot's family did not want to leave Sodom. The angels eventually took them by the hands and forced them to flee. Lot's wife turned back and became a permanent part of the landscape. Lot begged the angels to spare the nearby town of Bela and allow him to flee to that place. He said, this town is near enough to flee to, and it is small, Mitzar. Please let me escape there, that my life may be saved. Is it not small, Mitzar? Genesis 19:20. Therefore the town is now called Zoar, which sounds like the Hebrew word Lot used for small, Mitzar. The angels agreed to spare the town and let Lot take refuge in that place. A story like this is called an etiology, a word that means the study of causes. Any story that purports to explain why some place, someone, or something received this name can be classified as an etiology. Etiologies might attempt to explain the origin of a custom, an event, a name, a geographical formation, an object, a shrine, and so on. Etiologies tend to transmit orally from one generation to the next. Many biblical stories, especially in Genesis narratives, are etiologies. This indicates that the traditions behind the biblical text took shape within the geography of the Holy Land. The Bible is as much a story about the land of Israel as it is a story about the people of Israel. A few examples of etiologies that we have seen so far include the naming of Adam, the naming of Eve, the naming of Babel, the naming of Abraham, the naming of Sarah, and the naming of Isaac. The stories of Abraham worshiping at Shechem, Bethel, and Hebron have also provided etiological explanations of shrines at those locations. The distorted etiological tale of the origin of Moab and Ammon insults Israel's hostile neighbors. The Israelites probably enjoyed reminding one another that the Moabites and the Ammonites were children of Lot and his daughters. The name Moab sounds like Ma'avinu, which means from our father. Lot's firstborn daughter said, "Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may preserve our family through our father, Me'avinu." Genesis 19:32. So she named the boy Moab. The younger daughter named her son Ben-Ami, which means son of my people. An ironic name for the son of her father. Ben-Ami was the father of the Ammonites. The story explains why the Moabites and the Ammonites are unworthy to enter the congregation. The Torah says, "No Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord. None of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord." Deuteronomy 23:3. Nevertheless, the line of David, and Messiah came through a daughter of Moab. When Abraham's petition on behalf of Sodom a failure, the angels did not find 10 men in the city. Abraham's prayers did not avert the disaster. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov taught that even though Abraham did not save the people of Sodom, he did accomplish his primary objective. He managed to arouse divine compassion towards Lot and his daughters, and through them, the soul of Mashiach entered the world. Lot's older daughter gave birth to Moab, the ancestor of Ruth, the great-grandmother of King David, and the ancestor of Mashiach. Abraham's example teaches us that we too must engage in prayer to arouse divine compassion even in times of justice and judgment. Likutei Harakot 8:28b through 29a. Now Abraham journeyed from there toward the land of Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur, and then he sojourned in Gerar. Genesis 21. Where am I in this one? Nope, this one. That's Genesis 21, so we got into that chapter yet. Okay. Abraham continued to make his semi-nomadic migrations around the land of Canaan. He followed his flocks around the hill country in the wilderness of Judea and the semi-arid fields of the Negev. After some 25 years in the land of Canaan, something forced him to travel west into the territory of the Philistines. Perhaps a year of drought pushed him out of the Negev. In those days, a king named Abimelech ruled over the land of the Philistines. The name Abimelech means father of a king. He ruled over several cities on the coastal plains, including the inland city of Gerar, between Gaza and Beersheba. The name Gerar means my lodging place. May mean lodging place, Although it displays a doubled second consonant, GRR, it reminds the reader of the word for sojourner, ger, and the fact that by faith Abraham lived as a stranger in the land of promise, as in a foreign land. Hebrews 11:9. The Torah plays on the word again when it says he sojourned Gar in Gerar. So he sojourned, which is Gar, in Gerar, the land of sojourning. Abraham did not know what to expect from the people of Gerar. He thought to himself, surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Genesis 20:11. He told the people of Gerar, she is my sister. When King Abimelech heard about the beautiful woman who had come out of the Negev, he made some inquiries and found out that she was not married. She was traveling with her brother. He sent his men to bring her for his harem. Now this, a marvelous thing. How is it that after Sarah had grown old, she was so exceptionally beautiful that kings wanted to take her? When she was given to Pharaoh, even though she was already 65 years old, it is believable that she was still attractive. But once she had withered, and the manner of women had ceased from her, this is a marvelous thing. Perhaps she did regain her youth when the angel informed her, and she laughed, as our sages have said. Ramban on Genesis 22:2. Abraham said of his wife, "She is my sister." So Abimelech king of Gerar sent and took her. Genesis 22. When Abraham first set out from Mesopotamia, he feared that his beautiful wife might be his undoing. Surely some wicked fellow would kill him and steal her. In order to avoid being murdered, Abraham instructed Sarah to say of him, "He is my brother." Genesis 20:13. Besides, she actually is my sister, Abraham sheepishly explained to Abimelech after the ruse was discovered. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. Genesis 20:12. The ploy may have saved Abraham's life, but it had a downside. Sarah suffered abduction twice. Both Pharaoh and Abimelech abducted her for their harems. In later years, Abraham's son Isaac attempted the same ruse and almost had the same results. On the surface, it appears that the forefathers cared only for their own safety and shamelessly sacrificed their wives. They were not exactly models of chivalry. On the other hand, there may have been more to the ploy than cowardice and chauvinism. A husband could never consent to giving up his wife to another man. Someone trying to take a man's wife knew that he needed to kill the man first. The brother stood in a different relationship. In the ancient Near East and in biblical culture, a single woman traveling with her brother lived under the protection and authority of her brother. Potential suitors could negotiate with the brother for the hand of his sister. The suitor did not need to murder the brother to procure the bride. Instead, the suitor honored the woman's brother and sought his permission to marry the woman. Abraham and Sarah used this to their advantage. If someone came to Abraham asking for his sister's hand in marriage, he could delay his reply or refuse the offer on one pretense or another. If the situation seemed dangerous, the semi-nomadic family could pull up their tents, stakes, and make a hasty retreat. The ruse may have worked in most places, but it did not work with monarchs. Pharaoh of Egypt and King Abimelech of the land of Philistines did not feel that they needed to negotiate with Sarah's brother or receive his permission. They simply ordered the woman taken to their palaces. Sarah's brother was not in any position to object to a match with a monarch. The threefold repetition of the ploy, "She is my sister," Genesis 12:10 through 20, 21 through 18, and Genesis 26, 1 through 11, serves a narrative function. The story shows the reader that Abraham and Isaac were at the mercy of powerful overlords in Canaan, Egypt, and Philistia. They depended upon the good graces of landowners while they themselves wandered without property or title. All three stories involve water issues, a key component of land sovereignty in the Middle East. The "She is my sister" narratives present Abraham and Isaac as hapless and defenseless strangers in a strange land. As the writer of the book of Hebrews eulogizes them, these died in faith without receiving the promises. Hebrews 11:13. Despite appearances, God orchestrated events, and each of the "She is my sister" fiascos resulted in the humbling of the overlords and the increased honor and prosperity of the patriarchs. The deeds of the fathers are the portents for the sons. In later years, Israel fell into the hands of the Egyptians and the Philistines, respectively. God orchestrated events for his own glory and the glory of Israel. He rescued Israel from Egypt. When the Philistines defeated Israel and captured the Ark of the Covenant, their god Dagon, the seeming victor, fell upon his face before the Lord. God struck the Philistines with a plague until they returned the ark to Israel, just as Abimelech returned Sarah to Abraham. The story of the Jewish people in exile also follows in the footsteps of the fathers and the mothers. For many long centuries, the Jewish people have been driven from place to place until the declaration of the modern state of Israel. The Jewish people have had no permanent land of their own. The kings and rulers of the places of their sojourning, like Pharaoh and Abimelech, have held the Jewish people at their mercy, downtrodden and abused. Yet our Father in heaven sustains his people and rescues us from every evil. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you, that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done." Genesis 29. That night the Lord prevented Abimelech from approaching his new bride by afflicting him and his whole household, perhaps his whole people, with some type of deadly affliction. The affliction rendered Abimelech impotent. He did not violate Sarah. The Lord appeared to the king in a dream and declared, "Behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is married." Genesis 23. The sages derived from this that a Gentile is liable to the death penalty for committing adultery, and they derived that a Gentile cannot claim ignorance of the law. We learned that a son of Noah may become liable to death if he had the opportunity to acquire instruction about a prohibited thing and did not do so. Abimelech objected that Abraham had deceived him. He did not know that a woman was married. He protested, "In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I have done this." Genesis 25. The Lord knew that Abimelech sinned in ignorance. He promised to heal the king and his people only if the king would repent by returning Abraham's wife. He said, "Restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not restore her, know that you will surely die, and all who are yours." Genesis 27. The sages learned from this that a man who injures his neighbor must restore the damage and ask for a pardon. Even if the offending party were to give all the finest rams in the world to the offended person, the offense will not be forgiven until he asks him for pardon. Abraham said, "Because I thought, surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife." Genesis 20:11. Abimelech scolded Abraham for nearly bringing destruction on him and his own people. He demanded an explanation. Why had Abraham deceived him? Abraham explained, "I thought surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife." In the Bible, the term fear of God, or fear of the Lord, refers to the belief that God sees all man's deeds, and he punishes sin and rewards righteousness, punishing the wicked by bringing his way on his own head, and justifying the righteous by giving him according to his righteousness. 2 Chronicles 6:23. Without the fear of God, a person does not have faith, and without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. Hebrews 11:6. I guess that's good. The genuine fear of God believes that God sees all men's deeds, even those things that are done in secret. Abraham had no reason to believe that the people of Abimelech's kingdom conducted themselves according to the fear of God. In the absence of genuine fear of God, lust and temptation overpower a person's civil veneer. Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maids so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed fast all the wombs of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Genesis 20:17-18. The Lord told Abimelech to ask Abraham to pray for him. Abraham modeled the principles of forgiveness for us by praying for the healing of Abimelech and his people. From where do we learn that an injured person who refuses to forgive his injurer when he apologizes is called a cruel person? From the words, Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech. Bava Kama 92a. Whoever is merciful to his fellow is certainly a son of our father Abraham, and whosoever is not merciful to his fellow is certainly not a son of our father Abraham. Baitza 32b. The Torah does not indicate the exact nature of affliction with which God smote Abimelech and his people, but Genesis 28:18 indicates that the problem prevented Abimelech's wife and maidservants from bearing children, for the Lord had closed fast all the wombs of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. The Talmud deduces that the Lord must have literally closed the bodily openings of Abimelech's household. Even those women who were about to give birth found that they could not deliver their children until Abraham prayed for them. For the Lord had closed fast all the wombs of the household of Abimelech. It was stated at the academy of Rabbi Yanai that even the hens belonging to Abimelech could not lay their eggs. Bava Kama 92a. Abraham prayed on behalf of Abimelech and his wives. The Lord healed them. The women stalled and labored gave birth. Potency returned to Abimelech and his household. His wives and concubines bore children. Abraham's prayers on behalf of Abimelech did all of this, even though his prayers for himself and his wife Sarah had gone unanswered. For all of his married life, Abraham had hoped for and prayed for the birth of a son through his wife Sarah. Her womb remained closed all those many years until he prayed on behalf of Abimelech. After Abraham prayed for Abimelech's wives, the Lord took note of Sarah. So Sarah conceived and bore a son. Genesis 20:18-21:2. Not until Abraham prayed for others did the Lord answer his prayers for himself and his wife. How do we know that the Almighty answers one who prays for something on behalf of his fellow, while he himself needs the same thing? Because it says Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maids. And immediately after that it says, and the Lord took note of Sarah, just as Abraham had prayed on behalf of Abimelech. Bava Kama 92a. Then the Lord took note of Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Genesis 21:1. Genesis 21 tells the story of how God visited Sarah and kept the promise he had made to her. She conceived a son and gave birth to Isaac at the appointed time, Moed, of which God had spoken to him. Genesis 21:2. The word Moed need not imply anything more than a fixed time, but the Torah uses the same word to refer to biblical festivals, i.e. God's appointed times. The sages speculated that Isaac might have been born on a festival. Some sages believed that Isaac was born at the appointed times. The sages speculated that Isaac might have been born on a festival. Some sages believed that Isaac was born at the appointed times. The sages speculated that Isaac might have been born on a festival. Some sages believed that Isaac was born at the Passover. That opinion explains why the sages chose Genesis 21 for the primary Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah, Sarah, Rachel, and Hannah were visited. How can we prove this? Rabbi Eliezer said, we derive it from the two instances of the word visited and the two instances of the word remembered. It is written concerning Rachel in Genesis 30:22. Then God remembered Rachel, and it is written concerning Hannah in 1 Samuel 1:19, and the Lord remembered her. In the Torah, there is a corresponding instance of the same word in connection with Rosh Hashanah, as it is written in Leviticus 23:24. A remembrance by blowing of trumpets. The two instances of the word visited follow it is written concerning Hannah in 1 Samuel 2:21. The Lord visited Hannah. And it also says regarding Sarah in Genesis 21:1. Then the Lord visited Sarah. Rosh Hashanah 11a. Sarah was visited on Rosh Hashanah, and Isaac was born 7 months later on the night of Passover. The four barren ones were visited on Rosh Hashanah: Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. Midrash Takuma, Vayera 17. Ironically, the four women known as the mothers were all barren. Sarah, and Sarai was barren, and she had no child. Genesis 11:30. Rebekah, and Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. Genesis 25:21. Leah, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he unlocked her womb. Genesis 29:31. Rachel was barren. Genesis 29:31. In all the biblical stories of barren women, the Lord miraculously reverses their infertility. Rabbi Levi said, wherever it is written, she had no child, it means that she would eventually bear one. The child of a barren woman is born, not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. John 1:13. A miraculous conception that falls beyond the scope of human agency indicates the hand of providence. A miraculous conception marks out a child for a great and divinely ordained destiny. At first glance, the barren woman miraculous conception story may seem to be the opposite of the story of Mary, the mother of the Master. Mary was young, virgin, and fertile, the very opposite of Sarah. In her case, the miracle rests in the complete absence of sexual genesis. Joseph had no union with her, and she was found to be with child before they came together. Matthew 1:18. When the angel Gabriel told Mary that she was to bear the Messiah, she complained, "How can this be, since I have never known a man?" Luke 1:34. The meaning of the story, however, is the same, only amplified. If an impossible conception within a barren mother's marks her child for a great and divinely ordained destiny, how much more so does a conception through a virgin? The conception of Yeshua, free of conventional agency, is the greater miracle, a direct sign from heaven. Therefore, the significance of the virgin birth is not primarily in the absence of the Father, so that God is reckoned as the spiritual sexual progenitor, heaven forbid. The significance is that the conception of Yeshua surpasses the ordinary biblical motive of barren women stories that began with Sarah. Okay, so we're moving on to this one. Now onto the shadows of the Messiah. Just because you got to go through the miraculous birth here too. All right. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. Genesis 21:2. Many biblical heroes were born in a miraculous manner. Sarah was the first of 7 barren women who miraculously conceived and gave birth to sons. The Bible uses the miraculous birth to indicate that God has set aside that child for some great purpose. When a barren woman gives birth to a son, a miracle has occurred. The supernatural conception in a barren womb indicates that God has singled out that child for a great destiny. The miraculous conception of birth of Yeshua served the same function. A virgin conception is even more supernatural than a barren woman's conception. The narrative of the virgin birth shows us that God destined Mary's child for an exceptional supernatural destiny, just as the miracle of his conception far exceeded that of Isaac's conception. So too Messiah's purpose and destiny far exceeds that of Isaac. Sarah laughs again. Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. Genesis 21:6. After the birth of Isaac, Sarah laughed and said, God has made laughter for me. Isaac, Yitzhak, means laughter. A year earlier, her doubt and incredulity inspired her cynical laughter. Now she laughed from joy over the birth of the child. The Master tells us, Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Luke 6:21. When will the mourners' weeping turn to laughter? When Messiah comes. We all will laugh with joy, as it is written, Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with joyful song. Psalm 126:2. Then we will all declare, along with Sarah, our mother, God has made laughter for us. Hence it is fitting that the promised seed of Abraham should be named Laughter. Messiah is called Isaac, Yitzhak. As it says, all who hear will laugh, Yitzhak, with me. And it is written, Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with joyful song. Perkei de Rabbeinu HaKodesh. Now it came about. Oh, that's Genesis 22. Got to go back here now. Sorry. All right. So Genesis 21:7. And she said, Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse her children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. The Talmud says that after the birth of Isaac, many scoffers arose. Some thought Abraham and Sarah had stolen a child or purchased one in the marketplace and claimed that he was their own. To remove all doubt, Abraham arranged a great feast. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. Genesis 21:8. Abraham invited all of the people from the surrounding lands, including the scoffers, to attend the celebration. Some said the child is Sarah's, but not Abraham's. Abraham is too old to father a son. Surely this is the son of Abimelech. To thwart these scoffers, God had made the face of the child Isaac to be a mirror image of his father Abraham. When people looked at the son, it was as if they were looking at the father. The lines of Isaac's face looked like Abraham's, and they all cried out, Abraham beget Isaac. Then they knew that this was truly Abraham's son, because he was the very image of his father. They looked so much alike that in later years people could not tell them apart. Whoever wished to speak to Abraham spoke to Isaac. This is similar to what our Master Yeshua says, He who has seen me has seen the Father. John 14:9. Some said, the son may be Abraham's, but surely the mother is Hagar or some other maidservant, for Sarah is barren. Here in this, Abraham called all the mothers present to bring their suckling infants to his wife Sarah. He said, Sarah, this is not the time for modesty. Sarah nursed all the infant children of the guests. She provided milk sufficient for the multitude of children. All doubt was then dispelled. This explains why she says, Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? She speaks of nursing children in the plural, but Isaac was only one child. Obviously, the story about Sarah nursing all the children should not be taken literally. It's a legendary embellishment. The rabbis taught that the milk of Sarah imbued those Gentile children with a spirit of righteousness. The children who nursed from Sarah became the progenitors of all the God-fearing Gentiles in the world. That statement should not be taken literally either, but on a symbolic level, it rings true. As explained earlier, Sarah represents the holy city of Jerusalem and Jerusalem above. The Talmudic legend about Sarah's milk is partially based on a prophecy in Isaiah about the milk of Jerusalem flowing out to all those who love her. Be joyful with Jerusalem and rejoice for her, all you who love her. Be exceedingly glad with her, all you who mourn over her, that you may nurse and be satisfied with her comforting breasts, that you may suck and be delighted with her bountiful bosom. For thus says the Lord, Behold, I extend peace to her like a river, and glory of the nations like an overflowing stream. And you will be nursed, you will be carried on the hip and fondled on the knees. Isaiah 66:10-12. Gentiles who call themselves by the name of God of Israel can trace their faith back to the city of Jerusalem. Like Sarah's milk that imbued the God-fearing Gentiles with righteousness, the faith in the God of Israel and his Messiah flowed out from Jerusalem. That repentance for forgiveness of sins would be proclaimed in his name to all the nations, beginning from Jerusalem. Luke 24:47. If not for the abundant milk of Jerusalem, the whole world would walk still in the darkness of paganism. Now Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, mocking. As Sarah and Abraham doted over Isaac, Abraham's son Ishmael became jealous, and he mocked Isaac. Sarah demanded that Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away. She said, "Drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son Isaac." Genesis 21:10. The expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael greatly troubled Abraham. It did not seem to be the right thing to do. The Torah forbids letting the firstborn of a preferred wife usurp the rights of the true firstborn son. Unexpectedly, God endorsed the plan. He told Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the lad and your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her." Genesis 21:12. God assured Abraham that Ishmael would also be cared for and receive the covenant promises and birthright privileges. He too will be a great nation, but only through Isaac would Abraham's seed be reckoned. He said, "Through Isaac your descendants shall be named." Genesis 21:12. That means that the promise God gave in regard to the land and the seed of Abraham would be filled only through Isaac's descendants. In Galatians 4:21 through 31, Paul briefly retold the story of Sarah and Hagar and their son Isaac and Ishmael. Paul used that story to illustrate his argument against his theological opponents in Galatia, who were encouraging the God-fearing Gentile believers to undergo circumcision and become Jewish. Paul chose the story to illustrate his argument because the traditional version of the story was as told in Judaism, pertained directly to questions about circumcision. According to the traditional Jewish telling of the story, as Paul would have known it, Ishmael mocked Isaac regarding the commandment of circumcision. Ishmael said to Isaac, "I am more beloved than you because I was circumcised at the age of 13. Isaac retorted, "I am more beloved than you because I was circumcised at 8 days. Ishmael taunted, "That makes me more beloved. At the age of 13, I could have protested the procedure, but I did not. I am more beloved than you because I was circumcised at the age of 13, but you were circumcised as a baby and had no choice in the matter." Ishmael could gloat over Isaac's because, unlike Isaac, he underwent circumcision at the age of 13, i.e. voluntarily and as an adult. Different versions of this story appear in a variety of rabbinic sources. Paul based Galatians 4 on the assumption that the story was all about bragging rights over circumcision. For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by the bondwoman and one by the free woman. Galatians 4:22. Paul prefaced his midrash with the provocative, "Tell me who you desire to be under the law. Do you not listen to the Torah?" Galatians 4:21. Paul used the term under law to refer to someone who is born legally Jewish or to a Gentile who has become legally Jewish through conversion. When Paul said "you who want to be under law," he referred to the Gentile God-fearers of Galatia who were planning on undergoing ritual conversion to become Jewish. Paul challenged them, "Tell me, you people who want to become Jewish under the Torah. Don't you know what it says in the Torah?" Then he briefly retold the story of Abraham's 2 wives and his 2 sons. Paul regarded the story of Isaac and Ishmael as especially relevant to the subject of conversion because both Isaac and Ishmael were sons of Abraham, Bene Avraham. When a Gentile converts and becomes Jewish, he takes the last name Ben Avraham, son of Abraham. When a Gentile woman undergoes conversion to become Jewish, she receives the last name Bat Avraham, daughter of Abraham. The Galatians were trying to achieve that Ben Avraham status by becoming Jewish. They wanted to join the legal family of Abraham. In the synagogue world, the name Ben Avraham, son of Abraham, indicates a proselyte. Paul used the story of Isaac and Ishmael to illustrate 2 different types of Bene Avraham, sons of Abraham, in other words, 2 different types of Gentile proselytes. Contrary to popular interpretations of Galatians 4, Paul was not contrasting Jews against Christians, nor was he contrasting Jews against Gentiles. He was contrasting 2 types of Gentile believers. But the son by the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and the son by the free woman through the promise. Galatians 4:23. Sarah's maidservant Hagar was a slave, but Sarah was a free woman. Paul explained that Ishmael, the slave woman's son, was born according to the flesh. The term according to the flesh means physically or bodily. Abraham and Hagar conceived Ishmael by natural physical means, according to the flesh. Ishmael was born in the normal physical way a son is born, by human physical efforts. Unlike Ishmael, Isaac was born through the promise. The term "through the promise" refers to the promise that Abraham would have a seed, in whom all nations will be blessed. Abraham's wife Sarah miraculously conceived and gave birth to Isaac, according to God's promise to give Abraham seed. The promise all nations will be blessed in Abraham's seed, the Messiah. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham by saying, "In you shall all the nations be blessed." Galatians 3:8. Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring. It does not say, "and to offspring, seeds," referring to many, but referring to one, "and to your offspring, seed, who is the Messiah." Galatians 3:16. This is allegorically speaking, for these women are two covenants. Galatians 4:24. Paul explained that Sarah and Hagar symbolize two covenants. The symbolism does not contrast the old and the new covenants. It contrasts the old covenant from Sinai and the even older covenant, the covenant God made with Abraham. The parable of the two mothers, two covenants, illustrates Paul's discussion about two covenants in Galatians 3:16 through 18. Hagar represents the covenant at Sinai. Sarah represents the covenant with Abraham, which is older and cannot be replaced by a covenant made 430 years later, just like Hagar cannot replace Sarah. One proceeding from Mount Sinai bearing children who are to be slaves, she is Hagar. Now this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. Galatians 4:24 through 25. Hagar represents Mount Sinai and being under the law. She bears children for slavery. The children born for slavery are not Jewish people or those who observe Torah. Instead, the discussion contrasts two different types of sons of Abraham, i.e. the two different types of proselytes. Paul compared the legal circumcised proselytes to Ishmael, the son of Hagar, because there was nothing miraculous about the way that they entered the family of Abraham. They became sons of Abraham by physical means in another passage. He called it the circumcision of the flesh, and a circumcision made with hands according to the flesh. Becoming legally Jewish makes a person a legitimate son of Abraham, just as Ishmael really was Abraham's son. Yet Ishmael's status, even as a son of Abraham, was that of a slave, so to speak. He was the son of a slave girl. Paul compared that to a Gentile who became Jewish and accountable to the legal authority of the sages and the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, which adjudicated Jewish law. The proselyte placed himself under the authority of the Jewish courts. Paul saw this as problematic for Gentile believers, perhaps because in Paul's day, as in our own, the religious authorities were not always friendly toward believers in Yeshua. But the Jerusalem above is free. She is our mother. Galatians 4:26. Sarah, on the other hand, represented the promises of the Abrahamic covenant, corresponding to Messianic Jerusalem and the world to come. Paul said she is our mother. To establish the analogy, Paul quoted a proof text from Isaiah 54. To Paul and the apostles. The prophecy of Isaiah 54 seemed especially relevant because it came immediately after Isaiah 53, the prophecy of the suffering servant. The Messiah's death and resurrection described in Isaiah 53 brings the redemption of Jerusalem described in Isaiah 54. And you, brethren, like Isaac, are children of promise. Galatians 4:28. To Paul, the God-fearing Gentile believer who remained a Gentile was a child of the promise God made to Abraham. All nations will be blessed in your seed. Paul likened the God-fearing Gentile believer to Isaac, who was also a child of the same covenant promises. On the other hand, the Gentile believers who underwent circumcision and went under the law to become Jewish set aside the promise God made to Abraham about all nations being blessed in his seed. The proselyte forfeited that promise by becoming a child of Abraham by natural means, according to the flesh. Literally, the removal of some specific flesh, which is the normal way of becoming part of Abraham's family. But as at that time, he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so it is now also. Galatians 4:29. Just as Ishmael, who was born according to the flesh, persecuted Isaac, who was born according to the Spirit, the proselytes in Galatia criticized the Gentile believers regarding circumcision, like Ishmael. The proselytes went through circumcision voluntarily as adults and became legally Jewish. The proselytes claimed to be more beloved and more legitimate because they willingly took upon themselves a commandment that the God-fearing Gentiles had not undertaken. They had bragging rights and status in the Jewish community that the God-fearing Gentile believers did not have. They criticized the Gentiles for refusing to take that step. But what does the scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be an heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of a bondwoman, but of the free woman. Galatians 4:30-31. Just as Sarah made Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away, Paul urged the Gentile God-fearers to reject the pressure and persuasion of those who had gone through a conversion. He referred to the proselytes who were troubling the Galatian God-fearers as the son of the bondwoman. He argued that they could not inherit along with the son of the free woman, that is, along with those who remained Gentiles, but became sons of Abraham by faith. Paul did not mean that those who underwent conversion lost their salvation, but he broke with their doctrine and dogma. He identified the Gentile God-fearers as B'nai Abraham, sons of Abraham, not in the legal sense, but in a spiritual sense. They were spiritual proselytes. In summary, Paul's interpretation on the Sarah, Hagar, Isaac, Ishmael story contrasts two types of proselytes, the legal proselyte and the spiritual proselyte. The one becomes part of the Abraham's family by conventional conversion, the other through faith in Messiah, the promised seed of Abraham, in whom all nations find blessing. Contrary to conventional interpretations, Paul did not intend to contrast the Old Testament against the New Testament, or the Old Covenant against the New Covenant. He did not equate Judaism and Torah with slavery, nor did he characterize Christians as Isaac while characterizing Jews as Ishmael. The 10th trial. That's Genesis 22. Are we on 22 or 22:1? All right, so Genesis 22:1 now. All right. The 10th trial. Now came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. Genesis 22:1. Abraham's life moved along a continuous series of tests of faith. The call to leave his home and family, the journey to an unknown land, the famine that received him in Canaan, the quarrel with Lot, the 2 abductions of his wife, the barrenness of his wife, the difficulties with Hagar and Ishmael, the waiting for his son, and the strange commandments of his God all tested and tried his faith in the one God. The story of Abraham tells the story of faith tested. The sages teach that God tested Abraham 9 times. The 10th and last trial posed the most difficult of all the tests, because all of Abraham's dreams and hopes rested on Isaac's survival. The Lord had said, Though through Isaac shall your offspring be named. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, In Isaac your descendants shall be called. Hebrews 11:17-18. If God had said, Take your son, your other son Ishmael, whom you love, Abraham would have found the trial just as heartbreaking and difficult. The real test was not about Abraham's affection for Isaac as much as it was as a test of his faith in the promises of God. Everything Abraham believed and hoped for rested on Isaac. Abraham's obedience testifies to his great faith in God's promises and his selfless devotion to the Lord. The near sacrifice of Isaac vindicated God's choice of Abraham in our eyes and in the eyes of the world. In the gospel story, God himself takes on the role of Abraham and demonstrates his faithfulness before the entire world by sacrificing his son. In language so reminiscent of the first verses of Genesis 22 that it can hardly be coincidental, the Apostle John says, For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. John 3:16. In another place, John said, By this the love of God was manifested in us, that God sent his only begotten Son into the world, so that we might live through him. 1 John 4:9. With similar language, Paul said God demonstrates his own love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Messiah died for us. Romans 5:8. The sacrificial death of God's Son demonstrates God's love and faithfulness. Christians take that for granted, but long before the story of Yeshua or the writing of the first gospel, there was Abraham, a father, willing to sacrifice his only begotten and beloved Son as a demonstration of faithfulness and love. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Genesis 22:4. What did Abraham see in the distance? The Torah says that he saw the place. The rabbis used the term hamakom, i.e. the place, as a circumlocution for the name of God to indicate his omnipresence. When Abraham saw the place in the distance, he looked up and saw Mount Moriah, the mountain upon which the holy temple would one day be built. He saw the holy place, and above the place, he saw Hamakom, the dwelling presence of the Holy One, blessed be he. According to a firm and often repeated tradition, Abraham saw the dwelling presence of God in the distance, hovering over the Temple Mount. On the 3rd day, Abraham saw the glory of the Shekinah resting upon the top of the mountain, as it says. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. What did he see? He saw a pillar of fire that reached from heaven to earth. Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer 31. Abraham said to Isaac, Isaac, my son, Do you see what I see? Yes, he replied. He said to the two servants, Do you see what I see? No, they replied. He said, Since you do not see it, abide here with the donkey, for you are like the donkey. Genesis Rabbah 56:1. Abraham's two young men saw nothing, but on a nondescript hill, Abraham and Isaac saw with eyes of faith. They beheld the presence of God, the beatific vision, the perception of God in this world, a foretaste of the Messianic era. Abraham foresaw the place of Jerusalem in the Holy Temple as a reflection of the heavenly, because he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Hebrews 11:10. The writer of the book of Hebrews alludes to this beatific vision when he says that the forefathers died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance. Hebrews 11:13. Okay. Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you. Genesis 22:5. Before sacrificing Isaac, he left his two young men, assuring them both he and Isaac would return shortly. Did Abraham intend to deceive the two young men? What value would his emphatic statement serve when he returned alone? Rather, Abraham believed that both he and his son Isaac would return from the mountain. The two young men served as witnesses of his faith. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter shall be confirmed. Deuteronomy 19:15. By telling his servants that he and Isaac would return, Abraham publicly and legally testified of his faith in God's promises. According to the writer of the book of Hebrews, Abraham believed that God would provide a miraculous means by which Isaac would survive, even if it required a resurrection from the dead. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, In Isaac your seed shall be called. He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back in a parable. Hebrews 11:17-19. Though most versions translate the last word of Hebrews 11:19 as figuratively, the Greek word is parable, i.e., a parable. In what parable did Abraham receive Isaac back from the dead? The parable to which the apostles refer must be the ancient midrash on Genesis 22. According to that tradition, Isaac died on the altar, and God resurrected him from the dead. When the sword touched Isaac's throat, his soul flew clean out of him, and when he let his voice be heard from between the cherubim, Lay not thy hand upon the lad's soul was returned to his body. Then his father unbound him, and Isaac rose, knowing that in this way the dead would come back to life in the future, whereupon he began to recite, Blessed are you, Lord, who resurrects the dead. Perkei de Rabbi Eliezer 31. I'm sorry, what was that? Did I just see something? I'm not sure if I just saw something. Ooh, whatever. All right. I'll do that. That way I can see better. So now we're at... That's 22:16. All right, so now we're going into Shadow of the Messiah. All right. Where did I leave off? All right. Okay. The binding of Isaac. All right, I'm a little bit behind on this one. All right. The Torah says that after these things, God tested Abraham. After what things? Jewish tradition explains that prior to Genesis 22, God tested Abraham 9 times. We pretty much went through that. Judaism calls the story of Genesis the Akadat Yitzhak, the binding of Isaac. The word Akidah means binding. Devout Jews recite the Akidah every day after the initial morning blessing and before the recitation of the law as a sacrifice. The binding of Isaac is also the principal synagogue reading for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. The Torah never wastes words. The rabbis regard every jot and tittle of Torah as important, intentional, and fraught with deep meaning. If so, why did the Lord present his command to Abraham in the redundant phrases, Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac? We already know that Isaac is Abraham's son. We already know that Abraham loves his son. The Talmud explains the circuitous language with an imaginary dialogue between Abraham and God. God said, Take now your son. Abraham replied, I have 2 sons. God said, Your only son. Abraham replied, They are both only sons of their mothers. God said, The one you love. Abraham replied, I love them both. God said, Isaac. In his address to Abraham, God speaks of Isaac only in terms of association to Abraham, emphasizing their father-son relationship. To explain the unique father and son relationship between Abraham and Isaac, the writer of the book of Hebrews used the Greek term monogenes, which means only begotten. He says that Isaac was Abraham's only begotten son, Hebrews 11:17. The Gospel of John applied the same title to Yeshua, referring to him as the only begotten of the Father. The Gospel of John applied the same title to Yeshua, referring to him as the only begotten of the Father. Several rabbinic legends recognize the unique father and son relationship that Isaac and Abraham shared. In one legend, scoffers said the child is Sarah's but not Abraham's. Abraham is too old to sire a son. Surely this is the son of Abimelech. In response to the scoffers, God made the face of the child Isaac a mirror image of Abraham. When they looked at the son, they felt as if they were looking at the father. Then they knew that Abraham had truly begotten Isaac because Isaac's face was the image of his father's. And so the master has the same image of the father. The story of Isaac's life, particularly the Akedah, foreshadows the story of the Messiah, Isaac. The promised and sacrificed son speaks to us of Yeshua. Believers in every generation have recognized the parallels between Isaac and Yeshua and their respective stories. Both Isaac and Yeshua came as promised sons, the seed of Abraham, born through miraculous conceptions, long-awaited fulfillments to prophecy, offered up as atoning sacrifices, and rescued from death. The common Christian reading of the story assumes that Isaac went to the altar as a young lad. The popular image of a 10 or 12-year-old boy, obviously led to his death by his age-stooping father, appears in Christian artwork. The Torah does not indicate that Isaac was a young boy. At the time of his binding, it refers to Isaac as a na'ar, that is, a lad or a young man. The term na'ar usually refers to an unmarried youth of eligible bachelor of marriageable age. Jewish tradition claims that Isaac was 36 or 37 years old at the time of the Akedah. The Torah records Sarah's death, Genesis 23, immediately following Isaac's sacrifice, Genesis 22. Sarah died at the age of 127 years. But she was 90 at the time of Isaac's birth. Assuming that Genesis 22 and 23 follow in quick succession, the sages deduced that Isaac must have been between the ages of 36 and 37 at the time of the Akedah. Likewise, our master appears to have been born around 6 BCE, some 2 years before before the death of Herod the Great, 4 BCE. If Yeshua died in 30 CE, AD, that means he went to the cross around the age of 36, the same age as Isaac at the time of his binding. If Isaac went to the altar as a young adult at the time of the Akedah, and Abraham was well over 100 years old, how did the aged father forcefully bind and sacrifice a young man in the prime of his years? The Jewish reading of the story explains that Isaac willingly allowed Abraham to bind him and place him on the altar. Remove the image of a helpless young boy, led obviously to his death, and replace it with the image of an adult man, in full control of his faculties, willingly holding up his wrists for his father to bind, not unlike our master, who, for the love of his father and the love of his God, consented to the shame of the cross. Both men, in the prime of their lives, submitted to lay down their lives for the sake of heaven. Had Isaac wanted to resist, he surely could have overpowered his aged father. Likewise, when the guards came to arrest our master that night in Gethsemane, he said to Peter, "Do you think that I cannot appear to my father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" Matthew 26:53. I lay down my life so that I may take it up again. No one has taken it away from me, but I lay it down on my own initiative. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. John 10:17 through 18. And go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering, and on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. Genesis 22:2. The Lord told Abraham to go, Lech Lecha, to the land of Moriah, to one of the mountains of which I will tell you, using the same language that he used when he sent Abraham to Canaan, saying, "Go forth, Lech Lecha, from your country to the land which I will show you." What is the significance of the second occurrence of the words Lech Lecha? It teaches that the call of Abraham culminated in the commandments to sacrifice Isaac. The final test is related to the first test. Just as the first test began with the commandment, "Go forth from your land," so too the final test began with the commandment, "Go forth to the land of Moriah." In Jewish tradition, the binding of Isaac foreshadows the sacrificial services of the Holy Temple. God told Abraham to bring Isaac up to the land of Moriah. Mount Moriah, one of the three principal hills on which the city of Jerusalem rests.
Don't mind if I get a towel over here.
Yeah, sure.
No, I scraped on my head. I gotta
Oh,
try to get them off.
all right. Occupies a central spot in the geography of Judaism. All right. Solomon built the holy temple on Mount Moriah. God directed Abraham to go to the same mountain to sacrifice his son. The choice of Mount Moriah as the site of Abraham's altar connects the Akedah to the temple sacrifices. For example, a Talmudic legend says that when the men of Judah returned from captivity to rebuild the temple, they could not determine the precise spot on which the altar had stood until, by some miraculous vision, they saw the ashes of Isaac lying on that place. Then they knew that they had found the site on which to rebuild the holy altar. The story signifies that Isaac's Akedah provided the basis of the sacrificial services performed in the temple. This legend speaks of Isaac's ashes, but in reality, Abraham did not sacrifice Isaac as a burnt offering and reduce his body to ashes. In the biblical version of the story, Isaac emerged from the ordeal with nothing, not even a scratch. But in some rabbinic versions of the story, Abraham actually consummated the sacrifice of his son. Some say that Isaac swooned and died when he saw Abraham approaching with a knife. In other versions, Isaac spilled a quarter of his blood on the altar. Obviously, these traditions contradict the literal reading of the Torah. Jewish traditions retains the idea that Abraham actually carried out the sacrifice because, despite the fact that God stopped the sacrifice and substituted a ram, Abraham had fully intended to consummate the sacrifice. The folk tales and legends, therefore, credit Abraham and Isaac for the full sacrifice as if they had carried it out to its bitter end. For example, before sounding the ram's horn, shofar, trumpet on Rosh Hashanah, the synagogue trumpeter prays, "May you be filled with mercy for your people, and may you regard the ashes of Isaac, our forefather, that are heaped upon the altar." Judaism teaches that God gave the sacrificial services to Israel only in merit of the Akedah. The very day that Father Abraham put up his son on the top of the altar, the Holy One, blessed be He, instituted the continual offering of the two lambs, the one for the morning and the one for twilight. And to what end? So that at the hour when Israel offers up the continual offering on the altar, the Holy One, blessed be He, might recall the Akedah of Isaac, son of Abraham, Seder Eliyahu Rabbah. Jewish liturgy speaks of the sacrifice of Isaac's atoning for the sins of Israel on the principle that the death of the righteous provides atonement. That would be Moed 28a. Just as the red heifer atones for the sins of many, so too will the blood of the righteous atone for the sins of many. The apostles explained Yeshua's crucifixion in similar terms. The writer of the book of Hebrews teaches that the temple services on earth correspond to the heavenly sacrifice of Yeshua, his death, his burial, and his resurrection. The offerings and rituals of the temple prefigure the work of Messiah and his sacrifice. On a symbolic and metaphoric level, the New Testament writers compared Yeshua to a burnt offering, a sin offering, a guilt offering, a peace offering, a bread offering, a drink offering, a Yom Kippur offering, and so forth. Much as Jewish tradition makes Isaac's sacrifice the basis of temple services, the New Testament connects the Master's willing sacrificial death with the merit of the holy sacrifices in the temple. The righteous Abraham had many servants and maidservants who could have saddled the donkey for him. But Abraham rose up early and saddled the donkey himself. Why? This is to teach you about the alacrity with which one should perform God's commandments. Since God had given Abraham the commandment to go forth, he chose to attend to the arrangements by himself personally, spreading the wood for the sacrifice and saddling the donkey. Rashi says the donkey Abraham saddled for the binding of Isaac is the same donkey that Messiah the King is destined to be revealed upon, as it says, humble and mounted on a donkey, Zechariah 9:9. Upon this donkey Abraham rode. This was the donkey born to the donkey created during the twilight between the 6th and 7th day of creation. The same donkey was ridden by Moses when he came to Egypt. The same donkey will be ridden in the future by the son of David. I believe there's even belief that it was the same donkey that Balaam had. pretty much that was able to see the angel in its path. Pretty much just a descendant of the line of that donkey, I guess. Jewish folklore says that Satan opposed the binding of Isaac. He did all that he could to prevent Abraham from successfully bringing Isaac up to Mount Moriah as a sacrifice because he wanted to thwart Abraham's merit. As one might expect, he concentrated his primary efforts in 3 temptations. He first disguised himself as a wise old man and challenged Abraham. Surely you have misunderstood or misinterpreted God's command. He warned him that the consequences of such a barbarous act would hurt the reputation of both Abraham and his God. Despite such cogent arguments, Abraham refused to be dissuaded. The first temptation failed. Undiscouraged, Satan tried again. This time he disguised himself as a young man and approached Isaac. In this new guise, he warned Isaac, "Do you know that what your father intends to do? He has certainly lost his mind." He tried to convince Isaac to turn back from Moriah. The adversary's temptations shook Isaac, but they did not prevail. Twice foiled, Satan tried a different approach. For the third temptation, he disguised himself as a wide river, blocking the path to Moriah. Abraham and company attempted to ford the water, but the further they went, the deeper the water became, until at last it reached their necks, terrifying them. Abraham declared, "I know this place, on which there was no brook nor water. Now surely it is Satan who does all of this to us to draw us aside from the commands of God." Abraham rebuked Satan, saying, "The Lord rebuke you, Satan. Be gone from us, for we go by the command of God." Frightened at the rebuke of Abraham, Satan vanished, and the place became dry ground. The temptation of the master belongs to the same genre of Jewish story. In the gospel story, Satan uses 3 temptations to persuade Yeshua to abandon his mission and to bring the kingdom immediately. In Matthew 16:21-23, when Peter tried to dissuade Yeshua from going to Jerusalem to be crucified, the master rebuked Satan, saying, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's." Matthew 16:23. The circumstances in this story are similar to those that faced Abraham and his son. Both parties were on their way to the land of Moriah for a sacrifice, determined to accomplish the journey in order to fulfill the will and purpose of God. Satan challenged both with the voice of reason. In both stories, Satan wanted to prevent the sacrifice from happening, and in both stories, a sound rebuke thwarted his attempts. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. I do want to point out that when Yeshua was being tempted, Satan was twisting scripture and cherry picking it, and Yeshua rebuked Satan each time with what the Torah commands. The events of the Akedah occurred on the 3rd day, a day laden with the expectation of salvation. The 3rd day hints toward the resurrection of Yeshua, who left the tomb on the 3rd day. Hosea connects the 3rd day with resurrection, saying, "He will revive us after 2 days. He will raise us up on the 3rd day, that we may live before him." Hosea 6:2. The rabbis teach that Hosea spoke this prophecy in the merit of what Abraham did on the 3rd day, that is, in the merit of the sacrifice of Isaac. The Torah says that Abraham saw the place from a distance. What did Abraham see in the distance? The Torah says he saw the place. The sages use the term hamakom, the place, as a circumlocution for the name of God to indicate his omnipresence. When Abraham saw the place in the distance, he looked up and saw Mount Moriah, the mountain on which the holy temple would one day be built. He saw the holy place, and above it he saw Hamakom, the dwelling presence of the Holy One, blessed be He. According to a firm and often repeated tradition, Abraham saw the dwelling presence of God in the distance, hovering over the Temple Mount. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and beheld the cloud of glory billowing on the mountain, and he saw it from a distance. Genesis 22:4. Targum Pseudo-Yonatan. On the 3rd day, Abraham saw the glory of the Shekinah resting upon the top of the mountain, as it says, on the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. What did he see? He saw a pillar of fire that reached from heaven to earth. Perkei de Rabbi Eliezer 31. Abraham said to Isaac, "Isaac, my son, do you see what I see?" "Yes," he said. He replied to his servants, "Do you see what I see?" "No," they replied. He said, "Since you do not see it, abide here with the donkey, for you are like the donkey." Genesis Rabbah 56:1. Abraham's 2 young men saw nothing but a nondescript hill. Abraham and Isaac saw with the eyes of faith. They beheld the presence of God, the beatific vision, the perception of God in this world, a foretaste of the Messianic era. Abraham foresaw the place of Jerusalem and the holy temple as a reflection of the heavenly, because he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Hebrews 11:10. Oh, it's going to... All right. Yep. All right. Okay. The writer of the book of Hebrews alludes to this beatific vision when he says that the forefathers died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance. Hebrews 11:13. A hint at the resurrection. Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you." Before sacrificing Isaac, Abraham left 2 young men, assuring them that both he and Isaac would return to them. He considered that God is able to raise people from the dead. Hebrews 11:19. This alludes to the resurrection of Yeshua, the promised seed of Abraham, who willingly laid down his life and received it back again. Abraham believed that, if necessary, God would raise Isaac from the dead to fulfill his promises. He went boldly to sacrifice his son because he had full confidence in the promises of God. "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the young man will go over there to prove whether or not the promise will be established. So shall your sons be numerous as the stars, and we will worship the Lord of the world and return to you." Genesis 22:5, Targum Pseudo Yonatan, cited in Genesis 15:5. So the Targums were Aramaic sermons that were preached in the days of the apostles. Rashi says, Abraham prophesied that both of them would return. Abraham's prophecy alludes to Messiah, who will surely return to us. Many rabbis interpret Abraham's promise to return as an allusion to the final redemption when Israel returned to her borders. When the Shekinah will return to the place in the distance, Jerusalem, and when the Messiah will come, Abraham's confident declaration, "Stay here with the donkey, we will worship and return to you," alludes to the return of the one who will come humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac, his son, and then he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked on together. Genesis 22:6. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac, his son. The story presents a stark and vivid picture of Isaac struggling his way up Mount Moriah, stooped under the burden of the wood upon which he would be to be sacrificed. The scene depicts the suffering of Yeshua, who struggled to Golgotha under the weight of the cross upon which he was to be executed. Even the sages could not escape the obvious comparison. The Midrash Rabbah says matter-of-factly, like one who carries on his own shoulder the stake upon which he is to be executed. Isaac carried the wood. One climbed the hill of Golgotha, the other climbed the hill of Moriah. Both carried the weight of the wood their fathers placed upon their shoulders. So the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, "My father, here I am, my son." And he said, "Behold, the fire and the wood. Where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Genesis 22:6-7. The Torah underscores the unity of the father and son relationship when it says the 2 of them walked on together, and then repeats the same phrase 2 verses later. Notice how Genesis 22:6-8 repeats the words father and son several times within the brief conversation, bracketed by the phrase the 2 of them walked on together. So the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Behold, the fire and the wood. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." So the 2 of them walked on together. The repeated phrase places a special emphasis on the unity of purpose between father and son. The Hebrew adverb yakdav, together, expresses unity. The adverb comes from the root word yachad, be united, be made one. To be yakdav with someone is to be made one with them, alluding to the story of the Akedah and the relationship between Abraham and Isaac. The Gospel of John places heavy emphasis on the oneness of the Father and the Son. The Master says, "I and the Father are one." They walked on together. Rashi teaches that in this brief conversation, Isaac discerned that his father intended to sacrifice him. The realization should have breached the father-son relationship. Their unity of purpose should have shattered. Instead, the Torah repeats the phrase, the two of them walked on together, to indicate that this knowledge did not sever Isaac's unity with his father. The midrashic telling of the story removes the Torah's artful subtlety to make the meanings of this passage explicit. Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And if not, you are for a burnt offering, my son. So the two of them walked on together, one to slaughter, the other to be slaughtered. Genesis Rabbah 56:4. Isaac realized what was going to happen, and he asked, where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham replied, since you have asked, the Holy One, blessed be He, has chosen you. Isaac said, if He has chosen me, I give my life to Him. Nevertheless, the two of them walked on together. Midrash Tanchuma, Vayera 22. The scene grants us a glimpse into the relationship between God and His only begotten. We see the unity of will and purpose, the love of the father-son relationship, and the terrible resolve to perform the ultimate sacrifice. The son asked the father if the cup might be taken from him. Where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Nevertheless, the two of them walked on together to Golgotha. Not my will, but yours be done. Luke 22:42. When Isaac asked about the sacrificial lamb, Abraham replied, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering. The Hebrew word yereh, which the NASB translates as provide, literally means see. A more literal translation of Genesis 22:8 reads, God will see for himself the lamb. What does it mean that God will see the lamb? The rabbis explained that God sees the blood of Isaac spilled for the Jewish people. When God sees the blood of Isaac, His wrath is turned away from Israel. This explanation presents the sacrifice of Isaac as a propitiation that averts God's judgment. Accordingly, the blood on the doorframes during the Egyptian Passover symbolized the blood of Isaac. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. Exodus 12:13 means when I see the blood of the binding of Isaac, as it says in Genesis 22:14. And Abraham called the name of that place Hashem Yereh, the Lord will see. And elsewhere it says, and as he was about to destroy, the Lord saw and changed his mind. 1 Chronicles 21:15. What did he see? He saw the blood of the binding of Isaac, as it says, God will see for himself. God will see for himself the lamb. Mekilta Pisca 7. When the Almighty saw the blood of the Passover lambs on the doors of the Jewish homes, the blood reminded him of the binding of Isaac, so to speak. In the merit of Abraham's firstborn son, Isaac, who willingly offered himself as a sacrifice, the Lord spared the firstborn of the houses marked with blood. The merit of Isaac's sacrifice protected his children from God's judgment on Egypt. Some opinions say that the binding of Isaac occurred on Rosh Hashanah, but according to others, the sacrifice occurred on Passover. Similarly, the apostles linked the symbolism of the Passover lamb with the death of Yeshua, who died at Passover. In apostolic interpretation, the blood of the Passover lamb symbolically hints towards the atoning value of the Master's suffering. For Messiah, our Passover lamb, also has been sacrificed. 1 Corinthians 5:7. When Abraham said, God will see for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son, his words hint towards Yeshua, the Son of God, who is also called Lamb of God. In the vision of the book of Revelation, the Messiah is simply called the Lamb. Abraham's words hinted that God would see the Lamb sacrificed in Jerusalem, and that he would call the Lamb my son. Where am I in here? Pretty sure I read those ones. So yeah, I don't have to go to that till 16. All right. Keep going. Shadow of the Messiah. Starting to lose my voice a little bit. Then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood. Genesis 22:9. They came to the top of Mount Moriah, the place where the holy temple would one day be built. The Torah does not say Abraham built an altar there. It says Abraham built the altar there. This refers to the altar of the temple. The Targum says that Abraham rebuilt the altar, which Adam had built when God exiled him from Eden. It was the same altar on which Cain and Abel had sacrificed, and the same altar which Noah rebuilt when he left the ark. And bound his son Isaac, and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Genesis 22:9. When they came to the place that the Holy One, blessed be He, had designated, Abraham built the altar and bound his son Isaac. Jewish tradition teaches that Isaac did not resist. Can one bind a 37-year-old man without his consent? Isaac voluntarily complied with the will of his father and the will of the Almighty by offering his life as a sacrifice. He said, "Do not feel distressed, Father. Fulfill your Creator's will through me. May my blood provide atonement for the future Jewish people." The same tradition informed apostolic lore. Clement, disciple of Simon Peter, commented on the Akedah, saying, "Isaac cheerfully yielded himself as a sacrifice with perfect confidence, as if knowing what was to happen." Let me just take a look at the reference there. That was 1 Clement 31:3. This tradition raises one problem. If Isaac went to the altar as a willing sacrifice, why did Abraham bind him? According to Midrash Tanchuma, Isaac asked Abraham to bind him, lest he involuntarily flinch, causing the knife to stray, and thereby invalidating the sacrifice. Jewish law requires a sacrifice to be slaughtered in a specific manner, with a specific stroke of a knife. In the Midrash, Isaac says, "Father, bind me hand and foot, because the will to live is strong. When I see the knife approaching, I might involuntarily withdraw and disqualify the sacrifice by becoming blemished." Up until now, we have been referring to the story of the binding of Isaac by its Jewish title, the Akedah. Akedah means binding. The word Akedah stems from the Hebrew word akad, which the NASB translates as bound. In Genesis 22:9, the related adjective akod means ringed or striped. The Talmud explains that the use of the verb akad refers to the striped-like marks left by ropes on the ankles and wrists of a person tied hand and foot. A person bound in this manner bears the impression of the ropes on his skin. The entire story is named after the marks left on Isaac's body. Likewise, our Master Yeshua was bound in such manner that his wrists and ankles bear the marks, scarred for all eternity. Unlike the common depictions in the crucifixion artwork, the Romans typically drove spikes through their victims' ankles and wrists on the tissue of the palms and feet could not support the weight or the body of the cross. I'm surprised they didn't mention, since it says striped, palms and feet could not support the weight or the body of the cross. I'm surprised they didn't mention, since it says striped, palms and feet could not support the weight or the body of the cross. I'm surprised they didn't mention, since it says striped. "Reach here with your hand and put it into my side, and do not be unbelieving, but believing." John 20:27. Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." He said, "Here I am." "Do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do not do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Genesis 22:10-12. The writer of the book of Hebrews alludes to a parable about the Akedah. He says, "Abraham considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received Isaac back in a parable." Hebrews 11:19. In what parable did Abraham receive Isaac back from the dead? The writer of the book of Hebrews refers to a well-known midrashic tradition on Genesis 22, in which Isaac died on the altar. When the sword touched Isaac's throat, his soul flew clean out of him, and when he let his voice be heard from between the cherubim, "Lay not thy hand upon thy lad," the lad's soul was returned to his body. Then his father unbound him, and Isaac rose, knowing that in this way the dead would come back to life in the future, whereupon he began to recite, "Blessed are you, Lord, who resurrects the dead." Perkei de Rabbi Eliezer 31. As soon as Abraham's knife reached Isaac's neck, his soul departed. When the angel of the Lord called out to Abraham, staying his hand, Isaac's soul returned to him. Because rabbinic writings treat Isaac as if he actually died upon the altar, even if only momentarily, Isaac became an early symbol for resurrection. The tradition makes Isaac into a sort of first fruits of resurrection. By virtue of Isaac, who offered himself as a sacrifice on top of the altar, the Holy One, blessed be He, will resurrect the dead in the future. Did Isaac really die? Not in the Torah's version of the story, but the concept became well established in early Jewish tradition. The parable to which the writer of Hebrews referred is almost certainly a midrashic tradition, along the same lines as the one cited above. He must have been aware of the story about Isaac's momentary death and subsequent resurrection, and he must have been confident that his readership was also equally well versed in Jewish lore in order to catch what would otherwise be an obscure reference. That the writer and readers of the epistle were familiar with this particular midrash should not surprise us. The authors of the New Testament were, after all, Jewish men who had learned the Jewish scriptures from within a thoroughly Jewish context. The legend about Isaac's death and resurrection further ties the story of the binding of Isaac together with the story of the binding of Messiah. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. Shalom, Dave. How are you? How did Abraham react to the test? In the Bible, Abraham silently accepted the Lord's test. In the rabbinic writings, Abraham used the opportunity to bargain with God. Abraham prayed, "When the children of Isaac sin and face trouble, remember on their behalf the binding of Isaac, and regard it as if his ashes were heaped on the altar, and forgive their sins and redeem them from their troubles." The Holy One, blessed be He, replied, "I will judge them on Rosh Hashanah. If they want to invoke some merit and cause me to remember the binding of Isaac, let them blow a shofar on that day." Abraham asked, "What is a shofar?" The Holy One, blessed be He, replied, "Turn around and you will see it." Abraham turned around and saw a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. An anonymous grammatical form in Genesis 22:13 creates some uncertainty for translators and interpreters alike. The verse reads, "Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, afterward, a ram caught in the thicket by its horns." Does it mean the ram was behind Abraham? One commentator suggests that it means the ram became entangled in the thicket only after Abraham saw it. Another suggests that Abraham saw the ram only after the preceding events. Still another opinion has it that when he saw the ram, Abraham had a vision of Acharit HaYamim, the last days. The Jerusalem Talmud says that Abraham foresaw his children in the last days entangled in sin, like the ram caught in the thicket, and then he saw them redeemed afterwards by the sound of the ram's horn. The Midrash Rabbah also uses the word another, Achar, as a title for the Messiah. Substituting the word with Messiah, we read, Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, Messiah, a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. As Abraham lifted up his eyes and beheld a ram caught in the thicket by its horns, did he also see afterward, by means of a prophetic vision, centuries later, the Messiah with his head caught in a crown of thorns? Perhaps Abraham saw the lamb provided by God. Oh, I'm starting to lose my voice more and more. It's all right. It's a word of the cause to lose the voice over, right? Where am I in here? 16 is where this one picks up. Okay. I'm only on 13 right now. A ram caught in a thicket by its horns, Genesis 22:13. The sages say that God created Abraham's ram for this purpose during the first days of creation. In other words, the Almighty prepared Isaac's ram for sacrifice since the foundation of the world. In a similar way, the apostles called Yeshua the Lamb, foreknown before the foundation of the world. 1 Peter 1:20. He is the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. The Midrash claims that the two horns of the ram became the two trumpets, the shofarot of God. The Holy One, blessed be He, blew the first shofar on Mount Sinai, on the occasion of the giving of the Torah, as described in Exodus 19. He will sound the second one to herald the coming of the Messiah. The shofar blown at Mount Sinai, when the Torah was given, came from the ram which had been sacrificed in the place of Isaac. The left horn was blown for a shofar at Mount Sinai, and its right horn will be blown to herald the coming of the Messiah. The right horn was larger than the left, and thus concerning the days of Messiah it is written in Isaiah 27:13, "On that day a great shofar will be blown." Perkei de Rabbi Eliezer 31. Rabbi Beche objected to this interpretation. Was not the ram burnt as a burnt offering, together with its horns, skin, and flesh? How could this be the source of the shofar that was blown at Mount Sinai? He went on to answer his own question, saying, the answer is that God created a new ram out of the ashes. How can the horn of from Isaac's ram be the same horn that will herald the coming of Messiah if that ram was completely burned? God resurrected the ram. Abraham called the name of the place, "The Lord will see," as it is said to this day. In the mount of the Lord it will be seen. Genesis 22:14. Abraham renamed the place Adonai Yereh, which means the Lord will see. Remember that in Abraham's time, Melchizedek's city of Salem occupied the region of Moriah. Jewish tradition provides a fanciful etymology based on the two names. When King David renamed the city, he wanted to pay honor to both Melchizedek and Abraham. Therefore, he combined the names to form Jerusalem, which sounds similar to Jerusalem, Yerushalayim. The newly combined name means peace will be seen. The name prophetically hints toward the kingdom of heaven, when the Messiah will rule from Jerusalem, and all the earth will know, and the peace of the Messianic era. Thanks to the sacrifice of the Messiah at Jerusalem, a sacrifice prefigured in Isaac's near sacrifice at Jerusalem, peace will be seen in that city. Abraham was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Hebrews 11:10-16. Remember for us, Lord our God, the covenant, the kindness, and the oath that you swore to our father Abraham on Mount Moriah. Let there appear before you the Akedah, when Abraham, our father, bound Isaac, his son, upon the altar. So may your mercy suppress your anger from upon us. And may you mercifully remember today the Akedah of Isaac, for the sake of his offspring. Blessed are you, Lord, who remembers the covenant. Rosh Hashanah prayers. May he, our master, yet remember on our behalf the love of the mighty, and for the sake of the Son, who was bound, may he nullify our adversary, and in the merit of the wholesome one, may the awesome God bring forth today our judgment and righteousness, for this day is holy to our master. Yom Kippur prayers. That ends this one. Don't I have a bookmark for this? Ugh. That's all right. I'll put that aside for now, since we're done with that one. How many more pages do I have on this one, huh? Last page. Sweet. Because I'm starting to lose my voice. But then I got Voice of the Prophets over here for this week's Torah portion as well. By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing, and I have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed, as the stars of the heavens, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Genesis 22:16-18. It's technically Yaakov, the brother of our master, but they have it as James because, well, King James had the name changed from Jacob, Yaakov, to James. Brother of our master says that Abraham our father was justified by works when he offered up Isaac his son on the altar, and when he was called the friend of God. James 2:21-23. Jewish sources describe Abraham as a man characterized by the virtue of hesed, a word that can mean loving kindness or covenant devotion. Abraham's trials of faith tested his devotion to his covenant friend. The Bible calls Abraham the friend of God because God and Abraham had a mutual covenant partnership. Abraham was the friend of God in the sense that he was God's covenant partner. God tested Abraham to test the extent of Abraham's loyalty, hesed, to the covenant relationship. Abraham passed the test. He proved his devotion by obeying God and bringing Isaac as a sacrifice. When God saw that Abraham had chosen to keep and honor the covenant, he reconfirmed the covenant, saying, because you have done this thing and not withheld your son. In other words, the fulfillment of the covenant promises God made to Abraham were contingent upon Abraham's obedience in offering his only son. Because Abraham willingly offered up his son, God agreed to keep his obligation to Abraham. A covenant is a two-way relationship. Abraham met the test and proved his loyalty to his covenant friend. That left the ball in God's court, so to speak. It was God's turn to prove his own loyalty to the covenant. In so doing, the Almighty could not bring to the table less than Abraham had brought. Abraham demonstrated his covenant loyalty through willingly sacrificing his only son. And by doing that, he obligated the Almighty to reciprocate. Abraham's hesed demanded God's hesed. He remembers the hesed of our forefathers and brings a redeemer to their children's children, for his name's sake with love. Abraham's willing sacrifice asked for an equal show of covenant devotion from the Lord. The sacrifice of Isaac not only foreshadowed the sacrifice of Yeshua, it demanded it. That's a good study, a really good study. Depths of the Torah, FFOZ commentary, as well as Shadows of the Messiah, FFOZ commentary. Check them out at ffoz.org. We're in the Prophets now. Voice of the Prophets commentary for the Haftarah portion. The Haftarah portion for Vayera contains two stories about Elisha the prophet. The first relates to a story of a widowed woman who was about to lose her sons to her creditors. She appealed to Elisha for help. He instructed her to collect empty jars from her neighbors and pour a little bit of oil she had left into the jars. A multiplication miracle filled all the jars, providing the widow resources to pay her debts and more. The second story describes how a barren woman from Shunem provided exceptional hospitality to Elisha, the prophet, and his disciple Gehazi. Elisha wanted to thank her for her hospitality, so he gave her the blessing of bearing a son. Several years later, the boy died from heat stroke. The Shunammite woman sought out Elisha, who sent his servant Gehazi to try to resurrect the boy. When Gehazi failed, Elisha himself resurrected the boy and returned to his mother. The Haftarah's connection to the Parashat Vayera draws primarily upon the prophetic promise of a son made to a barren woman and its subsequent fulfillment, and also the resurrection. In the Torah portion, the angel of the Lord promised that Sarah would bear a son, saying, "I will surely return to you at that time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. At the appointed time I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." In the Haftarah portion, Elisha virtually quotes this text when he tells the Shunammite woman, "At this season next year you will embrace a son." 2 Kings 4:16. Further connections between the Torah portion and the Haftarah will be explored in the commentary. Pray for my voice to hold out, at least for the commentary. Not sure. It'll probably be like each of these chapters is like an hour long. I swear, like I'm not even sure if I'll be able to. But this is looking like a long chapter, 30 pages. So, oh wait, no, that's high as Sarah. Never mind. Nope. Okay, so not 30 pages. So this is a little bit. I think 12 pages about. No, 14 pages. Maybe might be able to do it. All right. Now a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves." 2 Kings 4:1. During the reign of Ahab and Jezebel, the prophets of the Lord were hunted and killed. Those who survived did so by hiding in caves and disappearing from society. They lived in poverty. Circumstances did not improve much under the reign of Ahab's sons. In the days of King Joram, a woman came to Elisha the prophet with a desperate plea. Her husband had been a prophet. His death left her widowed, with 2 sons and enormous debts. Now her husband's creditor was demanding that she surrender her 2 sons in lieu of her debt. In the ancient world, a creditor could take a debtor or his children as a slave to pay off bad debt. Many laws of the Torah attempt to mitigate the harsh reality of that economic system. Charging interest on a debt was forbidden. Creditors were to forgive all debts in the sabbatical year. The enslaved debtor could not be treated as a slave, but must receive the dignity of a hired servant. He could be redeemed by payment. His terms of service was limited to 6 years, or the Jubilee year, whichever came first. Torah also provides legislation to protect women from exploitation in such situations. According to Targumic tradition, the distraught woman with the 2 sons in 2 Kings 4 was the widow of Ahab's steward Obadiah, the man who had secretly hidden 100 prophets in caves and supplied them all with food and water while Queen Jezebel was hunting them. Apparently, Obadiah had run up in enormous debts by feeding those 100 prophets. Makes sense. The Targum derives the association between the widow's husbands and Obadiah, the steward, from her description of her husband as a man who feared the Lord. 1 Kings 18:3 says, Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. Was the woman of 2 Kings 4 really the widow of Obadiah? Probably not, but Josephus knew the tradition in his day. For they say that the widow of Obadiah, Ahab's steward, came to Elisha and said that he was not ignorant how her husband had preserved the prophets that were to be slain by Jezebel. One second.
What most of the dad probably want them all.
What's that?
Shot most of the dad.
Yeah. You still look tired though.
Not really.
Not really? You say so. Say so. All right. Okay. Husband had preserved the prophets that were slain to be slain by Jezebel, the wife of Ahab, for she said that he hid 100 of them and had borrowed money for their maintenance, and that after her husband's death, she and her children were carried away to be made slaves by the creditors, and she desired of him to have mercy upon her on account of what her husband did, and afford her some assistance. Josephus Antiquities 947. The widow's traditional association with Obadiah, the steward of Ahab, explains why the Haftarah portion for Vayera includes this brief story. The Torah portion opens in Genesis 18 with the story of Abraham's magnanimous display of hospitality for the 3 strangers who appeared at his tent. God rewards his hospitality with a miraculous birth. Likewise, by feeding and sustaining the 100 prophets, Obadiah merited a miracle from the one who executes justice for the orphan and the widow. Deuteronomy 10:18. Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" And she said, "Your maidservant has nothing in the house except for a jar of oil." 2 Kings 4:2. Elisha asked the woman, "What shall I do for you?" As a member of the prophetic community, the woman knew the stories of Elijah. She would have known the story about how Elijah sustained the widow of Zarephath and her son by miraculously multiplying a handful of flour in the bowl and a little oil in the jar. Elijah prophesied that the handful of flour and the little jar of oil would last until the drought lifted. The bowl of flour was not exhausted, nor did the jar of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke through Elijah. This reminds me of how the people who were in wandering the desert, God sustained them, and their clothes did not wear out, and their sandals did not wear out, and he provided for them food, sustenance for the whole time. So God takes care of the needs of those who are righteous and have merited his favor, and he looks after them, and they have no needs because they're taken care of by God. Elisha was Elijah's disciple, and according to the rumor in the prophetic community, the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha. 2 Kings 2:15. Could Elisha perform a multiplication miracle as his master Elijah had done? Elisha instructed a woman to borrow empty vessels from her neighbors, close the door behind her, and pour the oil into the empty vessels. She and her 2 sons did as the prophet told them, and they filled all the empty jars. Only when they had filled the last jar did the oil cease flowing. The spirit of Elijah did rest on Elisha. Yeshua demonstrated that he operated in the same prophetic spirit as Elijah and Elisha when he multiplied the loaves and fish and fed the thousands. 5,000 at one time and 4,000 another time. 5 loaves to be the 5 books of the Torah, and the 2 fish, I believe, to be the oral Torah and the written Torah. So she went from him and shut the door behind her and her sons. They were bringing the vessels to her, and she poured. 2 Kings 4:5. Elisha instructed the woman to take the empty jars into her house and shut the door behind you and your sons. So she went from him and shut the door behind her. The miracle happened only behind the privacy of the closed door. The same chapter tells how the Shunammite woman, also anticipating a miracle, laid her dead son on Elisha's bed and shut the door behind him and went out. When Elisha came to the child, he entered and shut the door behind them both and prayed to the Lord. 2 Kings 4:33. Likewise, our Master taught us to privately seek our Father who is unseen, He sought out secluded places where he could spend time in prayer. He said, when you pray, go into your inner room, close your door, and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Come, my people, enter into your rooms and close your doors behind you. Isaiah 26:20. Now there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman, and she persuaded him to eat food. And so it was, as often as he passed by, he turned in there to eat food. 2 Kings 4:8. This week's Torah portion contains two stories about hospitality. Genesis 18 relates how Abraham and Sarah exercised gracious hospitality to their guests, who later turned out to be messengers from God. Genesis 19 contrasts the hospitality of Abraham's nephew Lot against the people of Sodom's wicked hospitality treatment of those same visitors. The story in 2 Kings 4 reflects the Torah portion by telling the story of how the Shunammite woman demonstrated hospitality to Elisha, the messenger of God. Biblical Shunem was a village on the southern slopes of the hill of Moreh, a mountain roughly 18 miles east of Mount Carmel, lying just south of Nazareth, on the border of the Jezreel Valley. The Arab village, Sulam, preserves the location and offers a close toponym for the biblical Shunem. When the Philistines marched against Saul, they made their camp at Shunem. David's caretaker, Abishag, was from Shunem. A woman and her husband lived in Shunem, where they owned a house and a parcel of agricultural land. The NASB translation of 2 Kings 4:8 describes her as a prominent woman. The Hebrew simply states that she was a great woman. Her husband was old, and like Sarah and Abraham, they had no children. She was barren. The Shunammite and her husband were part of a small religious minority in Israel who remained faithful to God and the commandments of his Torah. In Elijah's day, all but 7,000 Israelites were apostate and had turned to Baal. The Shunammite and her husband must have been among the 7,000 people of Israel who did not bow to Baal or had kissed his idol. Instead, they were devoted to the ministry of the prophets, routinely attending their teachings on the new moons and Sabbaths. As Elisha the prophet traveled through Jezreel Valley to and from his home at Carmel, he was continually passing through Shunem and a regular guest at the Shunammite's home, 18 miles from Carmel. Shunem sat about a day's worth of travel time by foot from Elisha's home. The Shunammite knew that Elisha was a holy man of God, so she counted it a privilege to host him. She urged him to accept her hospitality. Whenever in the vicinity, he turned aside for a meal at her home. The Shunammite woman asked her husband to build a spare room on top of their house where Elisha could lodge. Israelite houses had flat roofs that served as an extra open-air living space. The Shunammite couple dedicated a corner of their roof by walling it off and furnishing it with a bed, a table, a chair, and an oil lamp. The book of Proverbs envisions just this type of arrangement when it says, "It is better to live in a corner of a roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman." Proverbs 21:9. When Elisha saw that the Shunammite woman had done for him, he told his servant Gehazi to summon her and ask her what reward she would accept in repayment for her kindness. He could offer a blessing of some sort. In addition to his spiritual connections, Elisha was known as the king's court and moved among prestigious men. He told his servant Gehazi to ask her, "What can I do for you? Would you be spoken for by the king or to the captain of the army?" One might suppose that the woman's motive was to seek the holy man's blessing or some favor. Instead, the story makes it clear that she sought nothing from the prophet for herself. She only desired to be a servant to God's servant. She replied to Elisha's inquiry, saying, "I live among my own people," which Keel and Deitzlich interpret as meaning, "I live quietly and peaceably among my countrymen, so that I have no need for any intercession with the king and great men of the kingdom." Our master alludes to the story of the Shunammite woman when he says, "He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward." Matthew 10:41. The words "in the name of a prophet" are simply a rabbinic idiom, meaning because he is a prophet. The Shunammite provided Elisha with hospitality because, simply, he was a prophet of God. She had no ulterior motive. That is to say, she received a prophet because he was a prophet, not for the sake of receiving a reward. Our Master teaches that one who provides for a prophet or a righteous man without any ulterior motive in doing so will receive a reward. Conversely, one who offers provision to the servant of God for the sake of some reward will not receive a reward. Yeshua also says that when we provide for his disciples, it will be reckoned unto us as if we had provided hospitality for him. And one who provides hospitality for him is regarded as one who has provided hospitality for God. He says, whoever in the name of a disciple gives to one of these little ones even a cup of cold water to drink, because he is my disciple, truly I say to you, he shall not lose his reward. Matthew 10:42. The early believers considered offering hospitality to itinerant prophets an obligation, but apparently the gesture was subject to abuse. The early communities of believers found it necessary to set limits on the amount of hospitality a prophet could expect. The Didache, a compilation of apostolic-era instructions, required hosts to receive an apostle or prophet as they would the master, but only for 1 day, or at the most 2 days. If the prophet presumed to impose himself on his hosts for a 3rd day, he was to be considered a false prophet. Any prophet who directly asked for money or a gift was also to be disregarded as a false prophet. Remember that if they're asking for gifts, they're to be regarded as false prophets. And that's according to apostolic era, like 1st century document, the Didache. That's a 1st century document. So, yeah. Any of these preachers on the TV that are asking you for money, they're to be regarded as false prophets. Please let us make a little walled upper chamber, and let us set a bed for him there, and a table, and a chair, and a lampstand, and it shall be, when he comes to us, that he can turn in there. 2 Kings 4:10. The Shunammite woman placed a bed, table, chair, and oil lamp in the room for Elisha. This shows that one who takes guests into his home is like one who builds a sanctuary, mishkan, for the divine presence to dwell in. The first Hebrew letters for the word bed, mitah, table, shulchan, chair, kiseh, and lamp, ner, combine to create the acronym for the Hebrew word for sanctuary, mishkan. So it's always good to have a nice spare room with a bed, table, chair, and a lamp. That way, you have a mishkan in your own home for anyone that needs a bed. So I still need to put a chair. I can put a chair. I got a chair to put in there. Into my guest bedroom. And there's small tables. Maybe I should put a bigger table in there. I'll look into it. Then he said, at this season, next year, you will embrace a son. And she said, no, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant. 2 Kings 4:16. Our master says that whoever receives a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. Elisha wanted to reward the Shunammite woman with something, but she made no request of him. His servant Gehazi pointed out she has no son and her husband is old. The idea seemed good to Elisha. Notice the similarities here. This is why it's with this Torah portion, because the husband and the widow are old and advanced in years, and they're blessed with a son as well, like Abraham and Sarah. The idea seemed good to Elisha. What could make a better gift than the promise of a son? He called the woman to the roof, and as she stood in the doorway of his room, he told her, at this season next year, you will embrace a son. The angel of the Lord made the same promise regarding Sarah in Genesis 18:10. At this time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. In Hebrew, the words at this time of year are ka'et haya, which might literally translate as according to the time of life. This particular Hebrew turn of phrase occurs only 4 times in the entire Hebrew Bible. Twice in Genesis, in Genesis 18, regarding the promised birth of Isaac, and twice in 2 Kings 4, regarding the promised birth of the Shunammite son. The New American Standard translated it as this season next year, but Chayet Haya is probably best understood as a reference to springtime when life returns from the earth. We might translate it as that time of life. Ugh. When Sarah heard the angel of the Lord's promise, she expressed her incredulity by laughing to herself. Likewise, when the Shunammite woman heard Elisha's promise, she expressed her doubt. No, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your servant. 4:16. Genesis 18:14, the angel of the Lord responded to Sarah's cynicism by specifying, at the appointed time I will return to you, at the time of life, and Sarah will have a son. Likewise, immediately after reporting the Shunammite's objection, the woman conceived and bore a son at this appointed time, at the time of life. The correspondence in language between the two passages cannot be coincidental. Obviously, the writer of 2 Kings 4 meant to intentionally invoke the story in Genesis 18. I might need to take a break. I don't know. Got less than 10 pages. Pray for my voice. Pray for my throat. All right. Push on. God bless all of you who are with me right now, because it's actually a good mitzvah to study, to the studying Torah and to the Bible until the late hours. And I just happen to be working overnight tonight, so I can do so. It's a good way to start the week as well. We're meriting favor for this week with Hashem, right? For a good week to walk diligently in obedience. In addition to the curious phrase, according to the time of life, 3 of the above 4 passages also included the word appointed time, moed. The angel of the Lord promised that he would return at the appointed time and Sarah would have a son. Elisha promised that the Shunammite woman would have a son at the appointed time, and at the appointed time she did. Similarly, Genesis 21:2 says, so Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. The word moed need not imply anything more than a fixed time. The Torah uses the same word to refer to the biblical festivals, God's appointed times. As such, its use in Genesis 18:14 and 21:2, invited the sages to speculate that Isaac might have been born on a festival. The majority opinion posits that Isaac was born either at the appointed time of Passover or at the appointed time of Rosh Hashanah, Festival of Trumpets. The latter opinion explains why the sages chose Genesis 21, which tells the story of the birth of Isaac, for the primary Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah. A similar tradition holds that Elisha promised the Shunammite woman her son on the appointed time of Rosh Hashanah, and he was born 1 year later on the same appointed time. The birth of a promised son at a moed alludes to the coming of Messiah, who will come at the appointed time. It is not for you to know times or epochs, which the Father has fixed by his own authority, Acts 1:7, and of that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone, Matthew 24:36. Nonetheless, we celebrate Messiah's redemptive work at the cross, which corresponds to his first coming at the appointed time of spring Passover, and we celebrate the trumpet blast of his second coming at the appointed time of the fall, Rosh Hashanah. The promised son does come at the appointed time. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door behind him and went out. 2 Kings 4:21. Some years later, the Shunammite boy suffered heat stroke and died. The death of the promised son provides yet another connection between this week's Haftarah and the Torah portion. Genesis 22. Only a few verses after reporting Isaac's birth, the Torah tells us that God called upon Abraham and asked him to sacrifice his son. The Shunammite woman was unwilling to relinquish her son. She brought him to the prophet's room on the roof of her house and laid his body on Elisha's bed. Then she closed the door behind her, telling no one of the boy's death. She did not even tell her husband. The closed door reminds us of the previous story about the woman with the jar of oil. He said, "Why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, It will be well. 2 Kings 4:23. It was the middle of the day. She ordered her servant to bring her the donkey and drive it as quickly as possible to Carmel, where Elisha lived. Her husband objected. Why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. 2 Kings 4:23. In those days, the faithful remnant in Israel assembled on the appointed times to learn Torah and instruction from the prophets. From where do we learn that a person is obligated to visit his teacher during a festival? Because it says in 2 Kings 4:23, Why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. This verse teaches that on the new moon and on the Sabbath, a person should visit his teacher. The Shunammite deflected her husband's inquiry by simply replying shalom, a versatile word that could mean all is well or simply goodbye. Elisha saw her approaching from a distance and perceived that she was in distress. He sent his servant Gehazi to intercept her and inquire, but she deflected Gehazi as she had done her husband, simply saying shalom. The Sephardi reading of the Haftarah portion concludes with the Shunammite shalom in 2 Kings 4:26 and does not go on to finish the story. Ashkenazim read through to the end of the story in 4:37. The heart's bitterness. Then she said, Did I ask for a son for my Lord? Did I not say, Do not deceive me? 2 Kings 4:28. When she arrived at Elisha's home, she caught hold of his feet. The gesture reminds us of the several stories in the Gospels when the woman laid hold of the master's feet. In biblical times, a woman taking hold of a man's feet was considered within the boundaries of modesty. Nevertheless, Gehazi attempted to protect Elisha's dignity by thrusting the woman away. Elisha rebuked him, saying, Let her alone, for her soul is troubled within her. 4:27. The heart knows its own bitterness. Proverbs 14:10. This verse refers to the Shunammite woman after the death of her son, and when she came complaining to Elisha, what is written in 2 Kings 4:27. Gehazi came near to push her away, but the man of God said, Let her alone, for her soul is troubled within her. After he sent Gehazi to resurrect her son to life, telling him, And take my staff in your hand, the Shunammite said to him, As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, you abode in the mysteries of God and gave me a son at the beginning. Now abide in the mysteries of God and resurrect him to life. Exodus Rabbah 19:1. The Shunammite woman did not directly ask Elisha to resurrect her son, or even tell him about the death of the boy. She merely reminded him that she had never asked for him for a son. Did I ask for a son for my Lord? Did I not say, Do not deceive me? Elisha understood at once. Then he said to Gehazi, Gird up your loins, and take my staff in your hand, and go your way. If you meet any man, do not salute him, and if anyone salutes you, do not answer him, and lay my staff on the lad's face. 2 Kings 4:29. Realizing the urgency of the situation, Elisha put his staff into the hand of his disciple, and told him to hurry to Shunem. He told him to gird up his loins, an idiom that means pull up your tunic and cloak around your waist, and run. So urgent was his mission that Elisha told him not to slow down or pause to even return a man's greeting. He was to place the staff on the boy's body so that Elisha's power and authority might resurrect the child to life. The entire scene finds a strong echo in the Gospels. Just as Elisha sent out his disciple, Yeshua sends out his disciples with similar instructions. He instructed them that they should take nothing for their journey except a mere staff. He told them to raise the dead, Matthew 10:8. He told them to greet no one on the way, Luke 10:4. The warning against greeting anyone on the way contradicts Yeshua's earlier instructions to his disciples. In the Sermon on the Mount, he told them they were to greet every man. When he sent them out on a mission, however, he told them not to allow any delay to deter them. Why did Elisha not go himself? The urgency of the situation demanded speed. The young Gehazi was capable of traveling the 18 miles to Shunem faster. The mother of the lad said, As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. And he arose and followed her. 2 Kings 4:30. Still grasping the prophet's feet, the Shunammite woman vowed in the name of the Lord, As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. She was not content with Elisha sending Gehazi on his behalf. She was insisting that he himself should travel immediately to Shunem. Her words are a repetition of the oath that Elisha had sworn 3 times to his own master Elijah. As Elijah was preparing to depart, he urged Elisha to remain behind 3 times. Each time Elisha replied, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." Then Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff on the lad's face, but there was no sound or response. So he returned to meet him and told him the lad was not awakened. 2 Kings 4:31. They traveled through the night, still some distance from Shunem. They met Gehazi as he was returning. He reported, "The lad has not awakened." The rabbis offered various explanations for Gehazi's failure. One opinion has that he mocked at the idea of a staff could resurrect someone. Another opinion explains that he ignored Elisha's command not to return greetings while on the way to Shunem. A man greeted him and asked him where he was going. He replied, "To resurrect the dead." When the man heard this, he scoffed at the notion that a human being could perform a resurrection. This created doubt in Gehazi's heart. Because he doubted Elisha's ability, he was unable to perform the miracle on his behalf. When he returned to his master, Elisha said, "Now I know that through you I can accomplish nothing." Gehazi also failed when he deceived Naaman the leper. After Elisha healed Naaman of leprosy, he refused any sort of payment for the miracle. Gehazi pursued Naaman and told him that Elisha had changed his mind. Naaman gladly gave him a large amount of silver to give to Elisha. As a punishment, Gehazi received Naaman's leprosy. This story is echoed in the instructions Yeshua gave his disciples when he sent them out, saying, "Freely you received, freely give." Matthew 10:8. Some rabbinic opinions viewed Gehazi as a wicked person and ranked him along with those who have no share in the world to come, and attributed various sins to him. Others sought to explain his failures. One opinion states that his covetousness and desire for power destroyed his potential. What do Cain and Korah, Balaam, Doeg, Gehazi, Absalom, Adonijah, Uzziah, and Haman all have in common? The thing they desired was not given to them, and the thing they possessed was taken from them. Genesis Rabbah 25. One tradition says that he was punished because, as a disciple, he should not have been so brazen as to address his master by his first name. Another opinion blames Elisha for being too harsh with his disciple. One should not be like Elisha, who pushed Gehazi away with both hands. When parting from the study hall, some rabbis would say over their disciples, "May our company," schools of disciples, "not be like that of Elisha, from whom Gehazi went out." So he entered and shut the door behind them both and prayed to the Lord. 2 Kings 4:33. Elisha went into his room and found the dead boy. Elisha knew the story of how his master Elijah had once been staying with the widow in Zarephath. Like the Shunammite, the widow provided hospitality for Elijah and gave him an upper room on her house. When the woman's only son died, she cried out to Elijah. Elijah took the dead boy from her arms and carried him up to his room and laid him on his own bed. Then he beseeched God in prayer, saying, "O Lord my God, have you also brought calamity to the widow with whom I am staying by causing her son to die?" He stretched himself out upon the child's body 3 times and prayed, "O Lord my God, I pray to you, let this child's life return to him." The Lord heeded Elijah and raised the dead boy back to life. Now Elisha was facing the same situation. The woman who had also provided him with hospitality, the upper room on the house, the dead boy in the prophet's bed. Everything had come to pass just as it had before. This was the greatest test so far. Did the spirit of Elijah truly rest upon him? Would God resurrect the dead through him? Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? He shut the door and prayed to the Lord. Rabbi Eliezer says that Elisha prayed, "Master of the world, just as you performed miracles by the hand of Elijah, my master, and brought the dead to life, may you also let this child live." Elisha stretched himself over the dead boy's body, mirroring him mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. He felt the flesh of the boy grow warm, but he did not stir. Apparently anxious, Elisha paced back and forth and then tried again. This time the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes to life. The resurrection of the Shunammite son provides another important link to Torah portion of Vayera. In Genesis 22, the promised son Isaac is to be sacrificed on the altar. God intervenes and stops the sacrifice, sparing Isaac's life. However, in rabbinic tradition, Isaac actually did die on the altar, but God resurrected him back to life. Both stories tell of his death and the resurrection of a promised son who was born in a miraculous manner. Both stories foreshadow the Messiah. Everything that God does, the Tzaddik does. How so? God remembers barren women. Elisha too remembered a Shunammite woman. Where did this happen? For it is said in 2 Kings 4:16, "At this season next year you will embrace your son." God resurrects the dead, and Elisha also brought back to life the Shunammite woman. Deuteronomy Rabbah 10:3. And he called Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite woman." So he called her, and when she came into him, he said, "Take up your son." 2 Kings 4:36. Though she had never asked anything of a prophet, the Shunammite woman received a prophet's reward. At the beginning of the story, when Elisha was trying to determine an appropriate gift to bestow upon her for receiving him, he told Gehazi, the servant, "Call the Shunammite." From that encounter received her son, and at the end of the story, after successfully raising the boy from the dead, he again called Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite." She received the prophet's reward because she gave food to Elisha. The Shunammite was rewarded by having her son brought to life. Just over the hill of Moreh from Shunem, a modern Arab village called Nain marks the location of ancient Nain. The fame of Elisha's miraculous resurrection of the Shunammite son probably had not dissipated even after 900 years. No doubt the villagers of Nain were fond of recalling the story of how Elisha the prophet had resurrected the Shunammite's son just on the other side of the hill. It was their own piece of local lore to tell to strangers and to connect themselves with the Hebrew scriptures. In the days of our master, the people of Shunem and Nain had their favorite local legend reenacted before their eyes. As Yeshua and his disciples arrived at Nain, they met the funeral procession of a widow's only son. Yeshua felt compassion for the widow and said to her, "Do not weep." Luke 7:13. Then he turned to the funeral bier and stopped the funeral procession. "Young man, I say to you, arise." Luke 7:14. And the young man rose, immediately connecting Yeshua with the stories of Elijah and Elisha. The people declared, "A great prophet has arisen among us. The spirit of the prophets rests upon Yeshua." They told everyone what had happened, and if anyone doubted it, he could make the trip to Nain himself and meet the boy and his mother. Word of the resurrection miracle spread as far as Judea. Now Elisha spoke to the woman whose son he had restored to life, saying, "Arise and go with you, your household, and sojourn wherever you can sojourn. For the Lord has called for a famine, and it will even come on the land for 7 years." 2 Kings 8:1. When Elisha first sought to bestow a gesture of thanks upon a Shunammite woman, he asked, "Would you be spoken for to the king?" It was an offer to bring his influence and prestige to bear on the king of Israel in order to procure a favor of some sort. The woman declined the offer and replied, "I live among my own people." She had no petition to the king for anything. Several years after the incident of raising the Shunammite's son, Elisha warned the Shunammite and her family to escape a coming 7-year famine by leaving the Jezreel Valley. They did so. When the famine was over, however, they returned and found that the government had confiscated their property. The only recourse they had was an appeal to the king. The woman must have wished that Elisha would again ask her, "Would you be spoken for to the king?" They traveled to Samaria and received permission to petition the king. That day, the king had Gehazi, a former disciple of Elisha, in his court. "Please relate to me all the great things that Elisha has done," the king requested of Gehazi. At the very moment that Gehazi was telling the story of how Elisha raised the Shunammite son from the dead, in walked a woman with her son. Gehazi exclaimed, "My lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life." 2 Kings 8:5. The king asked the woman to retell the story. He was impressed with both the story and the coincidence of the woman's serendipitous appearance. He hardly dared deny her request to have her home and field returned to her. He went further than that, and he ruled on her behalf, saying, "Restore all that was hers, and all the produce of the field from the day that she left the land, even until now." 2 Kings 8:6. Elisha's original offer to prevail upon the king on the Shunammite's behalf was thus fulfilled. Even the seemingly greater miracles of the birth of her son and the resurrection served to fulfill the prophet's original offer. I love the ending. All this, they always end on such a such a great commentary set. Like, all the commentary sets from FFLZ are so informative, so powerful, and like each of the chapters are so great. Well, just went through chapters of 3 books of the commentary set. Baruch Hashem, I still have my voice. I still have several of you here. Thank you for listening so far. It's 3:22 in the morning. I've been going slowly through Chronicles of the Messiah commentary set, another commentary set that I own from FSLZ. On chapter 7 with it. Submersion and Temptation. I'm not sure if I'll get to it right now. It is 20 pages. Why are they always 20 pages? I feel like. And that's another hour to do. But I am at work and I do have duties to do. So I'll probably do this. I'll probably get off for an hour, let my voice recover, get back on, and after an hour passes, and do a chapter then. So, shalom. Have a good evening. Thank you for being here and listening. Have a good evening. God bless.